Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so picking back up again with Shazam Part 5, this one's really cool because what it does is explains the nature behind the Wildlands, right? Like how everything sort of popped off and unfolded. And then it also gives us a little bit more of the game lands, which I'm really excited about. And so in the last video, we basically picked up with like Black Adam essentially like arriving, kind of returning, and then showing up to the Rock of Eternity and realizing that like the doors to all the magic lands except for the monster land had basically been open. Now, the dark lands we have not seen yet. And so, you know, when it comes to like the Wasn't lands, we haven't really seen those either. We've only seen the fun lands, the game lands, and of course you have the Earthland itself and then the Wildlands, and that's basically been it. But the indication here from Black Adam is that one, if the monster lands were open, then who knows what would happen? It would be a terrible situation. And two, if all the lands were to go to war with each other, then it would basically spill out into the universe and it would doom all of reality. Now, you know, if I'm kind of being honest here, this kind of seems to be an on-running thing of what's going on with DC at the moment. And I don't know if it's really their intention, but it seems like every story that's going on kind of deals with this idea that like, and if they win, the world will end, like all of reality will end. And the issue with that is it kind of starts to get thin, right? I mean, it's like the idea of Superman dying, right? Like Superman died and suddenly nobody could die in comics, right? Because Superman came back, so anybody could come back. It was a license to kill death in comic books. It's one of these things where it kind of loses its effect, right? Like a reality destroying event needs to be something that's like huge and massive, like holy cow, this will end all things. Now, I think that really like Scott Snyder's Justice League kind of takes the lion's share of that in terms of things popping off, but it is kind of interesting to see in this because it's like, how can a bunch of anthropomorphic animals and a bunch of gamers lead to the end of all reality? And I think that's where like the other realms begin to come into play. We just haven't really seen those yet. I mean, it could be like the powers and the things there are just wild and exotic. And so it's a cool little moment here because what this does is initially shift over to Shazam. Now, with Shazam dealing with King Kid, trying to, at the very least, rescue Mary Marvel, it's one of these things where he kind of hits the nail on the head, right? But unintentionally, but it also sort of hits at the role of Shazam as a superhero. Because one of the things that Black Adam always hated about Billy Batson having the living lightning and being like the newest avatar, basically, of the old wizard Shazam, is that Billy was sort of deemed to be more worthy than Black Adam was. But the problem is that Billy is, for the most part, kind of a terrible superhero, right? I mean, like, he's a little kid, he goes around, he does kid things, he loses track of what he's supposed to be doing, he loses focus on the bigger picture, whereas Black Adam is a lot more serious. I mean, I think Black Adam would actually be a better superhero than Shazam would, but it is kind of cool to see that play out. Now, the reality is that this focuses on one element of the picture. If you look at Shazam in a broader scope, right, like you kind of move away from this particular story, this instance as he's viewed by Black Adam, and you look at him as the hero that he's been over the course of DC Comics, well, then it becomes a lot more interesting and it becomes a lot more clear in terms of why he was pegged to be that character. But again, I kind of stick with my statement. It'll probably piss off the Shazam fans, but in this day and age, you can't say anything without pissing people off, so I'm not too worried about it. But I would say Black Adam would probably be a better superhero than Shazam would. I mean, I really think he would. He'd be far more intense, and I think he'd be a little more cruel in terms of his goals. But at the end of the day, wars are won by those who are willing to do what the bad guys will do, not those who are trying to take the higher step, right? Because I mean, when it comes to conflicts like that, that's always kind of the dichotomy between the good guy and the bad guy is until the good guy is willing to do what the bad guy will do in order to win, then ultimately the bad guy will usually come out on top in the end, right? I mean, the idea of the fantasy depiction of superheroes doesn't really work that way. In like the real world, you got to be as bad as a bad guy to win. Otherwise, one, you're never going to be taken seriously, and two, you're never going to have the gumption to take the victory at the end of the day. You're only ever going to be a half measure. And so it's one of these cool little discussions that you get, you know, when it comes to these kind of comics. That's one of the reasons why I like them so much, right? I mean, you know, the nice guys never win. It's just the way that it works. You got to be a bad guy if you want to win sometimes. It's just kind of how it goes. And so because of that, where Shazam tries to reason with King Kid and say, hey, look, like, you know, this is the bad thing, that kind of stuff, what he ends up doing is kind of basically toying with King Kid, almost kind of building on it and saying, look, you're basically a kid who's afraid. That's essentially what this is. You're a kid who's afraid that you might get hurt again because of the situation that you came from. But like, I've bounced from foster home to foster home. I've never really known my parents. I've never really known what it meant to be loved by a biological parent, but I've still made do and I've still done well. You know, and so it's kind of comparing his situation to the situation of King Kid and saying, you can basically be a functioning, reasonable person Season 2. Now, King Kid's response to this is, I will let all of you go if you give me the living lightning. If you give me your power, then I'll let all of you go and everything will be fine. And again, that's kind of the indication here that because of the power of Shazam, because it's so coveted, because of the fact that everybody wants it, that it's one of these things where if what Black Adam says is true, then this will boil down to everybody trying to attain the power of the living lightning, right? Like in the game lands, it'll be, well, give me the living lightning and then you can go home, and whatever, in the Wildlands, give us the living lightning and you can go home. It'll be one of these things where give us your power so we can conquer the rest of the Wildlands or the rest of the Magic Lands, and then you can go home. But that's kind of what Black Adam has been trying to prevent here. It's what he's been trying to basically eliminate. And so the result of this is that Shazam basically tears off the mouthpiece of Mary Marvel, frees her, she shouts Shazam, and then she becomes her superhero counterpart, and then we switch over to the game lands. Now, the game lands, I still say, is the coolest part, because it's like Ready Player One, but the gaming side, where all you do is just run around and play games all the time. The funny thing about this is that in this instance, you basically got Eugene who's just kind of like, hey, look, so like, I just want to play games. That's really all I want to do is just play a whole bunch of games. If getting to the CPU is what we need to do in order to get back home, well, then I can get us there, right? Because Eugene's the gamer of the Shazam family. He just plays video games all the time. And so he's like the best person suited to get them out of there. The problem with this is that he makes a deal to get 10,000 credits, and then he wants to like jump into this race that can let them beat the game master. And that's when it's basically, or at least, take part in this particular race to build up more credits. And that's when he's told, no, your rank is too high now. You can't compete in this, but your friend can. So it's just kind of like, okay, well, that sucks now. It's kind of a cool little moment there. But at this point, then we jump back to the Wildlands, and we actually pick up with the Kangaroo Court. Now, this is kind of a double meaning, right? Like, this Kangaroo Court is designed to show it's a court where, it's a kangaroo who's the prosecutor, but a Kangaroo Court is also a name given to a court system where a person's put on trial for little or no evidence, and then just kind of, it's more like a dog and pony show, basically. And so that's essentially what's happening here. There's literally a kangaroo court, but then it also follows the meaning because there's no real evidence against them outside of the fact that they are human, and humans aren't really allowed there. Now, again, because of how they're treated, because of the fact that this entire trial is basically a sham, they're essentially found guilty like that, and they're sentenced to death by Tiger, and it gets kind of wonky because from there, that's when we basically pick up with like how everything unfolded. And what we end up learning over the course of this is that we're one of the Tigers in the early part of the story, or I guess in the last issue, who was essentially arrested for reading literature like How Not to Eat, My Friends and things like that, where he's arrested and turned in. We end up finding out that in the early days of this particular universe on this Earth, that humans did run the show, that humans really were just kind of, it was probably in a function similar to ours, albeit without any kind of superheroes, but eventually animals rose up against them, right? So it's like PETA's wet dream, basically. But animals rose up against them and then like turned on the humans. But during this gigantic revolt, during this massive revolt that took place, what ended up happening is that the Tigers actually sided with humans against all the animals. And when that happened, Tigers were kind of branded as inherent traitors, right? Like, Tigers could never be trusted. They could never be considered, reasonable. They are given a little bit of leeway in the sense that all animals are kind of allowed to go out there and do their own thing. But if a tiger at any point does anything that seems to indicate that they could turn against other animals, they're immediately arrested. And that's basically the way it goes. And that's what happened with this guy. He was carrying literature that indicated that he was trying to resist the temptation to consume his friends, to basically function the way tigers functioned back when there were city zoos and different things like that. And the result is that he was arrested and he was thrown here. And so he's essentially sentenced to either consume Darla and Freddie Freeman alongside the other tigers in the city zoo, or he'll be killed, stuffed, and mounted. So like, it's pretty dark. It's pretty screwed up, and it's pretty twisted. But it is a cool little bit of storytelling here, because what you get at the end of all this is that where Black Adam is racing to the Magic Lands as fast as he can to try to run up on the Fun Lands where Billy Batson resides and where all these dark secrets are being held, he's suddenly met by Dr. Savannah, who basically gives him kind of this ultimatum: join the Society of Mr. Mind or die. It's kind of a cool thing here, right? Because it's almost like Mr. Mind is building up his own Legion of Doom, kind of bringing back his own society from back in the day, which he basically had. And so with that in mind, like, it's kind of a slow build here. It's kind of the idea that it's taking a little while to basically build up to the grand poobah sort of finale that we're used to seeing with these kinds of stories. But again, like, we don't know exactly how long this is going to last for. I assume 6 issues. It could go longer, maybe 7, 8, or 9 issues. Again, it's kind of finicky when it comes to the Shazam run, because we're not really given like a volume, right? It's not like, part 1 of 6 or part 2 of 8 or something along those lines. It's just kind of a story being told. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.